Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I am Justin Asiri, and today is episode number 142. For those of you who have listened to other episodes, you know, traditionally on the show, I interview military veterans about their civilian career. We talk about what they do, how they got there, and advice for other vets who want to go that same route. Today, we are doing something different. We are doing a little book review, which makes me think of something that maybe, hopefully not, some of you are too young to remember, but it makes me think of this.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow.
That's right, we are doing a book review today in the true style of LeVar Burton's Reading Rainbow. The book I wanted to review today is one that I really think a lot of veterans and non-veterans would benefit from. I loved this book. It is called Failing Forward, Turning Mistakes into Stepping Stones for Success. And it's written by John C. Maxwell. It's a New York Times bestseller. The reason I wanted to use our time together to talk about this is that when I look back on the last 140 plus interviews with veterans, every single person without exception experienced failure. I think of Beyond the Uniform episode number 110 with Nick Taranto from Plated. We talk about how he raised $55 million in funding for his company, but we also talk about the day that he launched his company, having everything nearly swept out to sea, having it flop and not be nearly what they expected, and overcoming that failure. I think of episode number 84 with Nate Boyer, who walked onto the team in UT Austin and eventually joined the NFL. And he talks about being cut from the NFL as well and how that doesn't stop him from going on and pushing forward to new great things. I think of episode number 139 with Todd Connor, who founded Bunker Labs, and he talks about failing in politics. He talks about failing in consulting. He talks about so many failures that he accumulated on his way to the success with Bunker Labs and other parts of his life. And so the reason why I think this is so vital is it's not something I think that most people are familiar with in the military. For myself, I'm just speaking from my own experience. My view of failure in the military is drastically different than it is right now in the civilian workforce. And so I think it's vital that we learn to shift our mindset, that we learn to build up an immunity to failure in order to achieve the success we're all looking for. And, it's very likely that you're listening to this if you're on active duty. You're going to work your butt off to get your first job, and there's a good chance you're not going to like it. You're not going to like that first job you get. It's likely you're not going to knock it out of the park on your first try, and it may take you longer than you think to find your ideal career, and it's going to be littered with failure along the way to that success. One of the quotes I loved from this book before we get into it is just, if you want to take a stroll in your neighborhood, you can reasonably expect to have few, if any, problems. But that's not the case if you intend to climb Mount Everest. And if you're listening to this podcast, I know that you're not looking to have an average life, you're not looking to have an average career, you're not looking to have an average transition from the military. You're listening to this podcast because you're wanting something more, and that's why you're putting in this extra time and effort to learn from others and find a way to get there. And so because I know that you're striving for something greater, I know that you're also going to experience more failure than your average person. You're going to face more rejection, more criticism, and more catastrophes than your average person. And so that's one of the reasons I think this topic is so vital and why I think this book is so exceptional. One of the quotes that he says that I think sums up the book for me is, the only way you can get ahead is to fail early, fail often, and fail forward. And, really the difference between average people and achieving people is their perception of and response to failure. And so this book, as we get into it, it talks about failure as a process rather than a singular event. And we'll dive into a couple of the themes on the book, but that's basically the gist of it. Is if you want to achieve something great, you're going to have to go through lots of failure. I'm picturing, if you've seen Shawshank Redemption, when he climbs through that pipe of just feces and just disgust to get to freedom. I think that the success and autonomy and freedom that many of you are desiring is very achievable, but you're going to have to go through a lot more than you think to get there. And my intention for this episode is just to share some of the things that stood out from this book. My hope is that if it sparks a chord and resonates, that you'll get that book or listen to the audiobook through Audible. I think there's just so much to learn here. So I won't go through a ton of stuff today, just some of the topics that stood out to me as I was reviewing it. I just finished reading this about a week ago. And with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in. And so I'll kind of group things around, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different themes. Quick just rundown, true to Reading Rainbow, rundown on the book. This book is, let's see here, it's about 200 pages. It's a little bit dense for 200 pages. It took me a little bit of time to get through this, but I think that's because there's a lot of reflection that goes on as you read this. It's not one you can just tear through like a novel. It's 200 pages. I would say there's a lot of books I read that are 200 pages that should be 150 pages. I think that this book is spot on. I think it's very well edited. John C. Maxwell does an exceptional job of having each chapter centered around stories, around people throughout history. And, one of my favorites of those was Rudy from the movie, about the Notre Dame football player Rudy, who's also coincidentally a veteran, trying to get him on the show. It just goes through in much more vivid detail the amount of failure that he faced, far beyond what's shown in the movie. But he does this across the board. He includes lots of great examples and lots of great frameworks, too, for thinking differently about failure and learning from failure and overcoming them. So I'll just dive into kind of 6 or 7 things that stood out. The first thing that stood out is putting failure in perspective. One of the quotes I loved was, quote, "One of the greatest problems people have with failure is that they are too quick to judge isolated situations in their lives and label them as failures. Instead, they need to keep the bigger picture in mind." And I know it hasn't come out yet, but on January 15th, I'm releasing an interview with Gordon Logan, who started a franchise of over 1,700 haircut stores called Sport Clips. And one of the things I love about this, Gordon is, has had a long career and he's got perspective on it. And his story is so incredible because you'll see in it so many different failures that in the moment seemed catastrophic, and time again, they led him to a bigger success. And I think that relates really well to this quote that, in that moment, he might have labeled it as a failure, but now 10, 20, 30 years later, he sees that was the breakthrough moment for him to achieve something greater. And if that failure hadn't occurred, he wouldn't have achieved it. Another quote is, he says, quote, "He sees failure within the context of the bigger picture. His perspective leads to perseverance. His perseverance brings longevity, and his longevity gives him opportunities for success." What I love about this premise is it's like the sense from this book is it's trying to build up that immunity to failure because you need to go through so many failures. You need that perseverance to ultimately achieve worthwhile success. And so one of the ways to do that is to shift your perspective. And like many of the people I've had on the show say, take the long view in your career. 2 other quotes for you. First, failure is simply a price we pay to achieve success. And I think that that's such a great phrase. It's such a great mindset of just realizing if you want to achieve great things, you need to pay that price with failure. And, one last quote on this one from Thomas Edison. Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. And I don't know your exact circumstance as you're listening to this show, but I'm imagining there's many of you who are applying to grad school and will be rejected. I imagine there's many of you who are preparing for your first job applications and you will be rejected. I imagine there's many of you who are thinking of starting a company and it's already failing. I think that this is applicable to you no matter what you're doing. It's applicable in my life as well, but you need to persevere. And there's so many people, and you've heard these interviews so many times, it would have been so easy to throw in the towel. And you hear of people who applied for one more job, applied to one more school, applied to one more venture capitalist, and that was the one that made the difference. And so I think that this first lesson of putting failure in perspective is really vital. The second lesson was about shifting our relationship to failure. One of the quotes I loved was, people who don't give up keep trying because they don't base their self-worth on their performance. Instead, they have an internally based self-image. Rather than saying, I am a failure, they say, I missed that one, or I made a mistake. I know for myself that I have a really high internal critic. There's a lot of, there's this inner cynic that really turns up the volume for me on criticism. And I know in talking with lots of friends and other people, I'm not alone on this. My experience in the military was one of binary success and failure. I mean, we have ribbons, right? We have medals. We have just binary promoted, not promoted, success, failure, passing, not passing. And it's easy, I think, for us as veterans to start to establish our identity around that. And so that's one of the reasons I think it's vital to start to shift that identity, to not tie yourself to the limited outcome in the short term, not limiting yourself by what people think of you or how people judge you, and just to kind of keep the right perspective. One of the quotes he had around this was, to keep the right perspective, take responsibility for your actions, but don't take failure personally. And I think that we as veterans do a great job of taking accountability, but I do think, at least for myself, I do associate myself with my success or failure, and he makes a strong case in this book for distancing yourself from that, and that's going to give you the resilience to keep on trying. The next thing, the third of these 7 points, this is one where I'm going to borrow a phrase from Tony Robbins, but he talks about taking massive action. He talks about really figuring out what you want to achieve and then doing 10 or 100 or 1,000 times more than you think is necessary. And this is one of the quotes I loved from this book around that. Motivation is not going to strike you like lightning. And motivation is not something that someone else, a nurse, doctor, family member, can bestow or force on you. The whole idea of motivation is a trip. Forget motivation, just do it. After you start doing the thing, that's when the motivation comes and makes it easy for you to keep on doing it. And for those of you who listened to my 2017 reflections, I referenced a TED Talk that I'd highly recommend you check out. And it's a great 17-minute discussion on this, but about this thought of get rid of this thought of being in the mood to do something or being motivated to do it. It's a myth. Just dive in, start doing, taking massive action, and that will lead to great things. The fourth part of this was learning from mistakes. And that's obviously a critical component of failing forward. And just a quick caveat, the book really does a great job of laying out, I think, 15 different steps to failing forward. But I think one of the ones that stood out to me is it's not just about failing, but it's about learning from those mistakes. A couple quotes. First, if you always do what you have always done, then you will always get what you've always gotten wrong. Let me just say that one more time. If you always do what you've always done, then you will always get what you've always gotten wrong. And so, if you've heard these interviews before, a common theme that stands out for me is the importance of reflection, the importance of honesty with oneself. And that's what that quote brings up for me, is starting to learn from failure and starting to be honest about the root cause of what might be causing it. Another quote came from a gentleman named William Dean Singleton. He does a great job. John C. Maxwell does a great job of peppering this through with these incredible quotes that you want to just put on a t-shirt and wear around. But William Dean Singleton says, "Too many people, when they make a mistake, just keep stubbornly plowing ahead and end up repeating the same mistakes. I believe in the motto, try and try again, but the way I read it is, try, then stop and think, then try again." And this one rings true for me. I think, part personality, part experience in the military, I am great at just putting my head down and just plowing through walls. And the flip side of that is that sometimes I just keep on banging into a wall without realizing, hey, there's a door here. That might be the better way to go through here. And so I love this thought of coupling a willingness to fail with also the discipline to analyze the reason for failure. And, there's an exercise he has in this book of, it was like an 8-step process of figuring out what went wrong with a major failure. And I did that around my experience with my company Storybox, and it was really powerful. I literally went to a bar for an hour and had a beer and sat down and just journaled around this. And it brought about so many insights I hadn't had about some challenges I faced in starting and growing a company. And that's part of what this is having that process of analyzing failure, having the discipline to repeatedly do that so you can avoid those mistakes. That kind of leads into the next point, which was a theme around letting go of the past. And the quote to start this off is, "In more than 30 years of working with people, I've yet to meet a successful person who continually dwelled on his past difficulties." And that rings true for me. I don't know about you all, but for me, when I make a mistake, I kind of get in the gutter about it for a while. I make a mistake with managing my team. I make a mistake on sales. I lose a client. It really eats me up. I really want to do well in whatever I do. And so when I have these hiccups, it really gets in my head and it can throw me off my cadence for days and weeks and maybe sometimes longer. And again, if you listen to my episode about the takeaways from 2017, I referenced Richard Branson. I'd really encourage you to Google his interview on how I built this. Richard Branson, I have so much respect for him as an entrepreneur, as a businessman. And I love in this How I Built This episode, you'll learn about some of his failures, but really listen to him. I do think he's being genuine. You get the sense that he doesn't dwell on them. He makes a mistake, he learns, and he goes on. And I would wager to say, it's obvious that Richard Branson has achieved far more financially than I have in life. But I would also put a strong wager that Richard has made 1,000,000 times more mistakes than I have. And that's one of the reasons I think this part of the book about letting go of the past is so important. Had Richard let his failures get in his way, he wouldn't have achieved the great things he has. But he was willing to let go of the past, not overly identify with it, still learn from it, but push on. And I think of, actually, let me read another quote. He says, excuses, no matter how strong, never lead to achievement. And I think back, for those of you who went to a service academy, it was such a great lesson that one of those, 4 or 5 basic responses was, "No excuse, sir." And I think that that's really great. I think that many of us from the military walk away and we have complete accountability, complete responsibility. We're not willing to make excuses. But I do think that there's part of not letting those excuses get under, or not letting the failures get under your skin and define who you are. A couple other quotes. "Past hurts can make you bitter or better, The choice is yours. And I say this particularly for those of you who are on active duty. The transition to a civilian career, it is nonstop new. It is nonstop out of your comfort zone. It's nonstop mistakes. And so don't let that make you bitter. I've actually gotten a couple emails from people who listen to the show, and some of them, I don't even know how to respond. Some of them are so bitter about the transition, and it didn't work out the way that they planned. And I get that. I empathize with that. And you cannot choose the path to bitter. You have to choose, and it is a choice, to become better, to think smarter, not think farther, think smarter, to think sharper, to get better, to get stronger. It's, I think of that, the Christian Bale Dark Knight movie and the Batman movies of just like, getting stronger, getting better, getting, thinking further than the enemy. Another quote for you. Every major difficulty you face in life is a fork in the road. You choose which track you will head down, toward breakdown or to break through. And I know a lot of this probably, as you're listening to it, it sounds like motivational thinking, or it sounds like something you'd read on a Nike t-shirt. But I really, in interviewing so many veterans, I see this trend. You hear in these stories, even if it's not explicitly stated, the person I'm interviewing chose to go for the breakthrough rather than the breakdown. And even if you're 20 years into your civilian career, I'm sure you've faced these difficulties as well, and you know how powerful it is to make that choice to go for breakthrough rather than breakdown. Let's see, just two more things here. So the next one is to view failure as a process. A quote for you is, we overestimate the event and we underestimate the process. Every fulfilled dream occurred because of dedication to a process. I love that thought. Like, we can put so much weight on an event. I failed to hit my quota. I failed to get this job. I failed to get the promotion. Rather than valuing the process of saying, look, this failure is leading me to something. What can I learn from this failure? What can I take away from it? What value can I suck from it to achieve my eventual success? It's just lily pads that you're jumping one to the next. If you miss one, it's not a big deal, especially if you suck value out of it. Again, referencing that January or the 2017 recap episode, I talk about Gary Vaynerchuk and his interview with Ray Dalio, which I highly encourage you to listen to if you haven't already. Ray Dalio actually has a book out that I'll be reading about this, but he's got a great process in his life and in his company for analyzing failures and coming away with those takeaways. For those of you who have seen the movie Memento, where the lead character, he tattoos these lessons on his body and little clues for him in solving the murder of his wife. I think of it in that way sometimes, where you make a failure and you think about it and you reflect and you etch that on your skin so you've got that clue to not make the same mistake. And Ray, in his interview, he takes us to a different level of just really coming up with a lesson so you can be as efficient as possible in your failures. Another quote for you. To achieve your dreams, you must embrace adversity and make failure a regular part of your life. If you're not failing, you're probably not really moving forward. And I love this quote because I do think there is a route for you and for me to take the easy path, to take the stroll around the block instead of for aspiring to climb Mount Everest. But it's like exercise. If you are lifting weights and you accomplish every single rep, dude, you're not pushing yourself. If you're not pushing through to the point of failure, you're not going to get stronger. If you're rock climbing and you're not falling, you're not pushing yourself enough. You're taking too easy of a route. You need to be falling. You need to be failing. And you've heard me talk about this probably in other episodes, but getting out of your comfort zone. I think that's one of the reasons so many of us love to travel. When you travel overseas, you're in a new country, you don't speak the language, you're taking wrong turns on streets, you don't know where you're going, you're failing frequently, but it makes it so exciting and you're growing as a person. One more quote on this. There's an American playwright named William Saroyan. You all know him, right? William Saroyan, we all know him. But his quote was, "Good people are good because they've come to wisdom through failure. We get very little wisdom from success, you know." And I think that's so true, and I would encourage you too, if maybe this episode doesn't resonate with you, maybe you're not experiencing failure, my challenge to you then is get out of your comfort zone. Find something that you're failing at. Find something that you're getting pushed to your limits. Find something that you're not dominating. And I know that for myself, I stayed in for 5 years on submarines. At the tail end of my service, I knew all the crew members. I knew which yeoman to go through to get things done. I knew all the ropes for my division level experience. And had I stayed in, I'm sure I would have failed so much as a department head. I'm sure so much would have been new. I would have had to be delegating. I would have been growing and learning. And I know that when I got out, I failed a lot. I failed a lot at business school. I failed a lot in starting my company. And so that failure is where all the juice comes from. And if you're not experiencing it, that might be a sign that you need to step out of your comfort zone more. Last one, and again, I'm just covering just a fraction of what there is to learn in this book. But the last thing I'll say is he talks about taking smart risks. This is one of my favorite quotes. "Decide whether or not the goal is worth the risks involved. If it is, stop worrying." Let me read that one more time because I think it's so great. Decide whether or not the goal is worth the risks involved. If it is, stop worrying. And one of my professors at business school, Garth Sloaner, used to talk about a BHAD, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal. And this thought of like startups that change the world start with this just intimidating, fierce goal. And I think that's true in any career or any life. If you have that dream, I think of Chris Pestle, who I interviewed, who is an ESPN photographer and set out on this crazy goal of becoming a photographer when very few veterans have gone that route. But I love this thought that if you fix your sight on a goal that just truly jazzes you up. That could be physical, that could be athletic, that could be personal or professional. But when you have that goal, when you take that second to say, look, there's so many risks here, but is the goal worth it? Yep. Then who cares? Who cares about the risks? The risks don't matter. Once you determine that the goal is worth going after, that it's worth failing, that it's worth getting injured, that it's worth getting hurt, it's worth having your ego bruised or people thinking you're an idiot. If it's worth all those things, who cares if they come? You've already counted the cost. You've already said that the goal is worth going after. So no matter what comes your way, if people are shooting arrows at you, if people are putting you down, it doesn't matter because you know the goal is worth it. Another quote to go along with that. "I would rather try something great and fail than try nothing great and succeed." Or another quote by Sidney J. Harris. "Regret for things we did can be tempered by time. It is regret for the things we did not do that is inconsolable." Let me just say that one more time because I think this is so profound. Regret for the things that we did can be tempered by time. It is regret for the things we did not do that is inconsolable. And the takeaway here is that if you take risk and fail, you'll have fewer regrets than if you do nothing and fail. And so, my intention with this podcast is to equip you as military veterans with everything you need to succeed and have a thriving civilian career. And I hope that you are setting your sights high. I hope that you are really going for it. I know the world in every area needs strong leaders who have integrity. And I know if you're listening to this, if you have served in the military, I don't know you, but I know that that's true. I know that you have done incredible things to put your country first. You have made incredible sacrifices to keep us safe. And I know that if you take those same values and apply them in your civilian career, I know that you can change the world. That could be in politics, that could be in starting a business, that could be joining a company, that could just be being a great mom or a great dad, or just kind of pursuing whatever it is that makes you excited, writing books, taking photos, doing artwork, whatever it is, how crazy it sounds to you. I hope that you set your sights high. I hope that you're honest in what you want to do in your own life and what you want to achieve. And I just think now more than ever, the world needs people who know who they are and are being that person and achieving great things. And by that, I don't mean a high salary. I don't mean, getting a big title. I mean doing what you were born to do, doing what you know in your gut you want to do, and having the courage and audacity to pursue that. And so I know this is a bit of a soapbox exercise or episode, but I hope that you take away from this that if you set your sights high, which I hope you do, I hope you live that life that does not have regrets. But if you do, I know there is going to be a lot of failure and pain on that path. And I don't say that to discourage you. I say that to get your house in order, get your mindset ready for those failures, start to develop that tenacity and that resilience that is essential to achieve anything great. And I don't get anything for promoting this book, but if you check out Failing Forward, I hope this was just a brief taste of what you'll learn in reading that. I would love your thoughts. You can post them on the comment section of this episode. I'd love if you disagree with points, if you want to add in your own story, I think that would help the general discussion. But I hope this has been great for you. And it was great for me as well. I enjoyed the book. It's something that I wanted to read for myself and knew would be helpful for the community. But honestly, half the reason I did this episode was just to force me to kind of think through what I learned from this book. I hope that was helpful for you. We'll be back with more just traditional interviews in this month, where we've got 3 episodes a week, and hope that they're helpful for you. Have a great week.